Assalamu alaikum and good morning, everyone. We've had an overwhelming response to today's webinar. And while others will keep on joining as the hour goes along, we believe starting on time so that everyone makes the most out of what we have to say. And there's a lot of ground we want to cover. Today's webinar is understanding the Pakistani admission cycle, particularly the undergraduate cycle that has just passed. And we're going to go over the numbers. Nazia, if you can go to the next slide, please. My name is Shanza Khan. I am the founder and head counselor at Ivy. And we are also joined by the senior college counselor at Ion Ivy, Nazia Hashmi. Both of us have a background of studying at the Ivy League universities in the United States, as well as working in the development sector and the finance sector. You can have a detailed look at our bios on the website. Nazia, if you can go to the next slide, please. So the agenda for today is, why do top universities only admit a handful of students from Pakistan every year? The biggest myths around SAT scores, extracurriculars, and well-rounded profiles. And then Nazia will be talking about the rise of the new Ivies and how employer preferences are shifting, and how to think about university rankings, return on investment, and career outcomes in the age of AI. I will be speaking for roughly 15 minutes, followed by 20 minutes by Nazia, and we want to keep sufficient time for Q&A at the end, particularly given the high number of queries we have received in advance, so we want to do justice to that. Nazia, please, next slide. So, who all got, or how many people got into the Ivies in this year's cycle? I want to begin by saying that this is data we have gleaned from all publicly available sources. All the data from schools that have posted Ivy League acceptances from across the country, and all college counseling firms have been thoroughly looked at, and verifiable data has been picked up from over there. That said, two things are going to shift. One, wait lists will move. Wait lists are coming through and will go all the way till August. So you can expect some of these numbers, and I do expect some of these numbers to go up. Number two, in typical Pakistani style, particularly given what happened with a key institution last year and 2 students being sent back, there is some reservation on behalf of some students to submit their posts because of Nazar and so forth. And so they are not publicly sharing their data till they have gone to the United States. Once again, we expect these numbers to move up, but not by a large number. So if you look at the data, as of right now, there has been only one student, and a caveat, please, this is undergraduate data. I'm not looking at graduate data. Harvard University has admitted one student from Pakistan this year. Same is the case with Yale. 2 students from Princeton, 5 from Columbia, 3 from Penn. Brown is coming in at the highest number at 7, Dartmouth 3. And Cornell, I do expect to go up. Cornell is typically 8 to 10. Can we move on to the next slide, please?
Sorry. Yeah.
If we compare this to last year's numbers, that will give you a better picture of how acceptances typically work. So there were 5 acceptances at Harvard last year. Yale remains the same. Usually you see 1 or 2 acceptances as Yale. Harvard, typically 2 to 3 students get selected. Princeton remains around the same absolute number, 3 to 2. Columbia, same number. University of Pennsylvania, same number. Brown has actually gone up this year. That is a difference. Brown usually takes around 3 to 5 students from Pakistan. If you look at historical data, this year they have taken 7 students. That is something different. And as you can see, Cornell has gone down, but I expect these numbers to move. The key takeaway is if you just sit on these numbers for a second, approximately, give or take, total Ivy acceptances are less than 20. I do want that number to sink in with the audience, especially because as counselors, when we go to schools, when we speak to parents, when we're talking to students, what we hear over and over and over again, my child is targeting Harvard. Nothing wrong with that. But as an economist, it's important to keep the data in mind. Can we go on to the next slide, please, Nazia? This is the overall acceptance rate for all these institutions as provided in the common data set that the university releases themselves. For most of them, they are for this year, and for others, it is the year before. We have given the source at the bottom. Now, this also needs to be taken with a pinch of salt. When it says Cornell's acceptance rate is 8.3%, you need to take a pause. 8.3% is the overall acceptance rate. For any university, let's say that there are 100 students getting accepted. Approximately 80 of them are going to be US citizens and residents, not our audience today. The remaining 20 are going to be broken down into 2 segments depending on the university. I'll keep my conversation a bit broader, talking about T20 as well, along with the Ivies, into students who are asking for demonstrated need, because that's a lot what our parents talk about, and others who are not asking for aid. If an international student is not asking for aid, they are given preference in the process unless a university is need blind. There are only 8 universities that are need blind for international students in America. The rest are all need aware. And the other 5 are international students who are asking for full demonstrated need. Let's have a look at Harvard's 3.6% acceptance rate again. That means that approximately 2.2% or so are US citizens and residents, and then the remaining are international students. Harvard is need blind, and therefore it's an 80-20 ratio. Nazia, next slide, please. Another query that we get from parents who are familiar with this landscape, who went to the United States themselves when in the 90s and early 2000s, is what is going on? What is with this competitive landscape with so many, counseling firms and kids going completely bonkers applying for US universities? And we just wanted to share a comparison of acceptance rates over time. So if you look at example Penn, in 2004, the acceptance rate was 21%, and it is now at 5.4%. Duke, likewise, has gone from 22% to 5.7%. University of Michigan, 62% to 16%. So the competition is absolutely intense. There are numerous reasons for this. One, there were far fewer internationals applying, particularly Pakistanis, applying back then. Usually used to be boys, not girls. Now almost every student that we speak to across schools, across geography in Pakistan, wants to put their hat in the ring, which is great. The other is the incorporation of the Common App. The Common App allows you to apply to 20 universities electronically at the same time. So the number of applications has increased dramatically. Couple that with COVID, when many top universities went SAT optional, and that also gave hope to many students who were not good test takers that let's go ahead and put our application to top universities. Nazia, next slide, please. So what is the reality funnel? Something I want to kind of emphasize to students and parents. If there is a class or if there are 100 applicants to any university of high achieving, ambitious students around the world, and 25 of them are academically qualified, you have the top grades, you have the rigorous coursework, and your SAT score is 1500 plus. 25 of them approximately will have that. The high SAT score and the top grades gets you into the consideration pool. It does not guarantee you a spot. And that is something, once again, I want to emphasize. Many students and parents that we talk to, I have a 1530, I have a 1540, I have a 1570. I'm going to get into Yale. But we just saw Yale takes one student from Pakistan, usually might take two. That 1530, that 1570 gets you in consideration. Then they are looking at other elements. They're going to be looking at a strong extracurricular spike, where they're going to be looking at your leadership, your impact, your passion project, and your standout contributions. And Ivy League universities are seeking unique individuals who will contribute to their campus community. The depth of impact matters more than having a long list of extracurricular activities. So if you have 10 students who are both academically gifted and have strong extracurriculars, they have that checklist, they're meeting both the benchmarks. Even out of them, only 3 to 5 are going to get admitted. What is going on? Why not all of the 10? And that's simply because universities are going to consider institutional priorities into who those 3 to 5 students are. Maybe they want a STEM student who is coming from a rural background in Balochistan who will contribute to their campus. They don't want somebody coming from an urban center like Karachi and Lahore. Even if you're meeting the academic criteria, the extracurricular criteria, institutional priorities play a key role in who is getting admitted. So the key takeaway, guys, is you're not just competing for admission, you're competing for a very small number of spots amongst the best and brightest in the world. Next slide, please, Nazia. Another thing on the SAT score is that a 1500 plus is generally around 88 to 89th percentile of all SAT test takers. That means that around at the end of the day, 20,000 students globally have that score. How many seats do the Ivy League institutions have for their freshman year? Typically varies between 1800 to 22. So everyone that you are competing against has that 1500 plus. For a top 20 school, and I want to expand this beyond the Ivies, for a top 20 school, therefore, the Dukes, the Vanderbilts, the Northwesterns, you are competing to be in the top 50 of the nation, not your school, not your city, but the country. Next slide, please, Nazia. The other kind of myth we want to break is of the well-rounded student. We see parents really pushing students to be taking part in sports, to be taking part in debating, to be taking part in a multitude of activities. And what universities are trying to do is build a well-rounded class. They want people who have a unique contribution and bring that to the campus community. So our advice to students and parents are focus on a spike, which is a clear signal of intellectual direction and depth. A student who is interested in medicine should be publishing research and leading a health initiative. A student who's interested in CS ought to be building an app and contributing to real-world applications. One who's interested in policy should be engaged in structured debate, writing, and research. Admissions guidance from institutions such as MIT explicitly highlight the importance of passion and impact over superficial breadth. Depth signals potential, breadth signals activity. The Common App allows you to list 10 extracurricular activities. You should have depth in your top 3 extracurricular activities and engagement over a longer period of time. Next slide, please, Nazia. Another very common myth that we face from parents is, I am putting my child in the Columbia summer program or the Brown summer program and many others. And they think that just because they've been accepted in the summer program, they are going to get accepted at that university. Most of these, the vast majority of these summer programs are commercial programs hosted on prestigious campuses. They're not affiliated with the undergraduate admissions decisions in any way. Participation does not meaningfully improve your acceptance chances at all, unless the program is competitive, such as MIT's RSI program, a very competitive program, such as Yale's YYGS, Yale Young Global Scholars programs with a 6% acceptance rate. Usually 2 or 3 kids get accepted from Pakistan. Admission officers know that this is superficial engagement. So we strongly recommend to steer clear from pay-to-play programs. Very quickly now, before I hand the baton to Nazia, I want to run the audience through how is an application read at a highly selective school. Your regional admission officer is going to read the application. They usually have 8 to 12 minutes on the application. The first thing they will be looking at before they even look at your Common App essays or extracurriculars is the engagement or level of your academic rigor. What are your grades? Regardless of your curriculum, whether it is Cambridge, whether it is local, whether it is American, whether it is IB, have you taken the most rigorous academic courses available to you in your context? Then they're going to look at the soft qualities that are being put out in your letters of recommendation and the narrative that is coming across holistically in your application to support what they can advocate in committee if you meet the first bar. If your academics are not up to match, the application is killed right there and then. It is not going to make it to committee. But if the admission officer feels that there is sufficient material in there that they can bat for you, the student should have something memorable in there, whether it is a line from their essays or LORs or so on, that the regional officer can advocate, okay, these are the students I want coming from Pakistan. I know that we obsess over punctuation and grammar in essays, but honestly, at the end of the day, that while your essays are extremely important, don't get me wrong, they are not making or breaking your application. What is important is the narrative, the voice, the authenticity, not the grammar and vocabulary. Nazia, next slide, please. Over to Nazia. Once again, we know there are a lot of questions. Please feel free to continue putting them in the chat box. And at the end, we will be taking all your questions.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Shanta. So for everyone who may have joined a bit late, I'm Nazia, sort of counseling at INIV with Shanta. Have a background at Penn when the acceptance rate was 20%, so it was easier to get in. And also went to Hong Kong University of Science and Technology for my master's in econ. Let's get started. So I think, thank you, Shanta. I hope that wasn't too scary of a presentation, just in terms of how truly competitive this landscape is when we talk about, getting into the Ivy Leagues. What this part of the session is going to try to do is to take a step back and really understand what do we mean when we talk about Ivy universities, or when we talk about the T20 universities. What does an Ivy League mean? Right? So I want to take a pause over here because I think not many people may be familiar with this. So the Ivy League universities are the 8 universities that Shans also showed you, that include Columbia, Yale, Princeton, Harvard, Penn, etc. And they were initially formed around, academic conferences or athletic conferences and athletic, sports games that happen between the universities. But ultimately, they started representing elite academics, wealth, very rich resources, a very strong alumni pipeline that got you the network and the jobs, and very strong recruiting pipelines. More importantly, what the Ivy Leagues represent is very, the top of the line in terms of rankings. So when you look at, the common rankings like US News World Report, you're going to see, Princeton on top, Yale on top, Stanford, Stanford's not an Ivy League, but, the Ivy Plus, you're going to see all of these universities sort of on top. But why are they on top, right? A lot of the rankings that we look at, it's important to understand what ranking you're looking at. A lot of it is based on prestige, right? So when we talk about prestigious Ivy League universities, the word prestige, this actually blew my mind, is actually traces to the root word, which means illusion or magic trick, right? So it's a reputation that the universities have. And it's actually built primarily based off of universities voting for each other. So Harvard is going to vote for Yale, Columbia is going to vote for Penn in terms of which university has the best reputation, is the most prestigious. So you really have to ask yourself that when you're looking at rankings, which rankings you're looking at, and what does it mean when we talk about, these Ivy universities that are at the top. Main factor for which a lot of these universities are at the top, a significant factor, not main, but a significant factor is prestige. Now, is prestige important to you versus the ROI, right? So in terms of, if you take the prestige factor out, then you're going to see a lot of the other universities come up, which may be better suited for you. So if you care about, the salaries that you're going to earn versus the cost that you're spending at the school, if you are trying to align which university is best for you in terms of your major and, the type of job market that you want to enter, if financial aid is also a consideration, then you start seeing a lot of other universities that are not prestigious, not Ivy League, crop up on the rankings. So at INIV, what we try to do is, rather than, having students ask themselves, how do I get into an Ivy? We try to pivot, what university is a good fit for me? Now, I know everyone wants to go to Penn, Harvard, and I think our name is also INIV, but let's try to, switch the name from Ivy to what is the best university for me in terms of what my interests are. So let's look at the rankings as an example. Let's break it down. These are sort of the 3 main rankings that you're going to look at. If you look at US News rankings, this is sort of the gold standard, and this is where you see the Ivy Leagues on top. You'll see that prestige actually accounts for 40% of the ranking, right? So 40% of the ranking is due to universities voting for each other in terms of what is more prestigious. Obviously, you have a 50% also unweighted, so a lot of these Ivy League also do really well for you in terms of student outcome. But if you take the prestige factor out, then you're going to see other universities in Forbes rankings and Wall Street Journal. So Forbes ranking and Wall Street Journal don't account for prestige at all. They're looking, very clearly on what is the financial outcome in our end. Will this degree make you money after you graduate? Okay, how is it going to change your life trajectory after you graduate? What sort of salary potential are you going to get? What sort of, leadership success are you going to possibly see? And what sort of, careers are you going to embark after you graduate from this university? So as US News rankings, traditionally the rankings we look at also put a huge factor on prestige. You take prestige out, you're going to see a lot of the other universities prop up. So what this means is that when you're looking at, building your university list, it's important to understand what is it that you're after, because a more prestigious university, according to US News World Ranking, may not be providing you with the ROI that you need. So for example, if you do computer science from Penn versus computer science from UC Berkeley, which is a public university, you may have a higher return on your education just in terms of the educational pipeline, the career pipeline that's going to be available to you after that. The second thing you have to understand is that majors matter more than college. So simply looking at the rankings, what's number one, what's number two, doesn't tell you the complete picture at all. Stanford may be number one, but if you are, applying for history, then a liberal art college may be better suited for you, like Amherst. Or if you are looking at, again, engineering degrees, then Purdue, which is not an Ivy League, may give you a better chance at landing a job at Microsoft than doing the same engineering degree at Dartmouth, right? So it's very important that when we are building our college list, which is, at ION Ivy, what Shanza and I try to do carefully, is that we first look at what the academic profile is of the kid, which majors you are planning to apply for, and what sort of matters to you in terms of once you graduate. And based off of that, you have a holistic list that, yes, may not include the Harvards and the Yales, may include them, but will have a broader selection of other universities that it's very important to consider as well. The third sort of important thing to consider is the rise of the new Ivies. What do the new Ivies mean? So based off of this trend where, more and more people care less about prestige and more about what you are getting out of the university, Forbes actually did a study with the employers, the recruiting managers, the hiring managers, to really understand what sort of universities are they seeing top talent from that are getting recruited into, the top companies and that have, great skill potential as well as talent potential. And based off of that survey, so it's not based off of any statistics in terms of, what the graduation rate is, what the debt ratio is, what, the how, good the experience is, just clearly based on the survey of the employers and the recruiting managers and the hiring managers, what universities are you looking at when you want to recruit the top talent? So that's what we mean by the new Ivies, right? And this sort of reflects, the preferences of employers, right? Employers are also now shifting also just from saying that, oh, this kid went to Yale, so must be really good, versus does this kid have the technical skills, the problem-solving ability? Does he have the adaptability to get into AI-driven roles? At my company, is he able to going to upskill himself? Does he have the analytical skills that we need at this company, rather than how prestigious that university is? And there's actually a report by Forbes as well. There's a 37% drop in terms of employer preferences on selecting from Ivy League universities or prestigious universities. They are looking more in terms of what is the type of talent that different universities are producing. So what are these new Ivies, right? So here's an example. Forbes published a list in 2026 as well. A lot of these are, not Ivy Leagues. So these are the public universities. Public universities are those that, are funded by the state and give a lot of preference to the in-state residents. So it's important to keep that in mind, that usually their scholarships, financial aid, and their admission criteria heavily leans towards in-state residents. That being said, obviously, there's a huge international presence at these public universities as well, and they do have limited merit scholarships for students who are attending there. So if you look at these public new Ivies, so companies that are recruiting for engineering, so engineering companies, right, like Google, Microsoft, they're going to really value kids coming from Georgia Tech, coming from Purdue, coming from UT Austin. So if you're an engineering major, you must have these universities on your list as well, right? If you are looking at economics, then, William and Mary, University of Virginia, Wisconsin-Madison, again, universities that you may not have heard of, if you just look at simple rankings, are very strong when it comes to employers hiring folks from these universities. Separately, you have a list of private Ivies, right, of 2026. So over here, you're going to see Carnegie Mellon, which is right up there in terms of CS and engineering. So if I had a very strong academic profile in engineering, I would have Carnegie Mellon right up there and probably above my list compared to Dartmouth, which is an Ivy League, because Carnegie Mellon is like one of the preferred universities for engineering firms. If you look at Georgetown for economics, Northwestern, then these are really, really strong universities for economics as well, the number 4 and number 5. So you're going to see a lot of these new Ivies coming up that are preferred by employers, okay, that may not show up in the usual rankings that you look at, but will show up if you look at, WSJ or Forbes, and they will give you really good ROI if that is what you are after. So let's look at the rankings now, right? So I went through sort of the new Ivies that are cropping up in terms of just purely employer preferences. Those lists, by the way, that I showed you, these are not rankings. These are, just a list of universities that, that employers are hiring from. So sorry, I made a mistake over there in terms of saying Carnegie Mellon is number 1, but these are sort of, the group of universities that employers prefer. Now, if we look at rankings, right? So let's look at WSJ. So WSJ, Wall Street Journal, which, I referred to before as well, they put 70% of their weightage on ROI, the, return on your investment. So how much salary are you going to be earning? What earnings are you going to get once you graduate compared to the cost of the university? So, you obviously have your Stanford Ivy Plus University right up there. But then number 2 on WSJ, you'll see Babson College. Not many have heard of Babson College. I mean, we have at INIB, we're always pushing it for, kids who are interested in entrepreneurship and business. But this is a university, because it is a small college relatively, and it doesn't have that, reputation of Ivy Leagues in terms of the alumni network, it doesn't come up in the US News ranking overall as much. If you go separately into the entrepreneurship, you may see it there. But overall, it's not going to be there. But in WSJ, it's actually the weightage, because it's so high on ROI, Babson College is number 2. So if you are interested in entrepreneurship, then this is, university that you are going to be looking at. You see the Yale, Princeton, Harvard, but then you see Claremont McKenna, right? Which again, a lot of people are not familiar with, but if you are, a business major, then, Claremont McKenna is a university that you would be looking at. And an interesting observation, you see UC Berkeley here, which is a public university, it's above Penn, right? So UPenn is an Ivy League, and you have UC Berkeley, a public university, which is actually doing better than UPenn in terms of ROI. A caveat there, again, it depends on the major. So at Penn, if you are applying for finance, consulting, business, then UPenn can still give you a really high ROI just because of, their pipeline into tech and consulting jobs. UC Berkeley will be the better ROI for you, or the better financial decision for you if you are an engineering major compared to University of Pennsylvania. Moving to the next slide. Okay, you'd see other universities sort of prop up over here. You see that this list is probably, I'm guessing, showing a lot of universities that you may not have heard of before, like Harvey Mudd College, San Jose University, all that are above Cornell University, just in terms of the salary potential that you can hope to achieve. And if you take that prestigious 40% weightage out of it, then you start seeing a lot of these other universities crop up as well. Surprise universities. I sort of, put this over here because I think it's important to look at, if you've noticed, in the previous slide as well, I was comparing rankings in WSJ compared to US News and Forbes. You see the difference there. When you look at Babson College, you see the difference there. When you look at Columbia and UPenn, it's usually, lower on the US News ranking, higher on the WSJ. But then there are really some surprise universities that you were not expecting there. Babson I already spoke about, but Bentley University. If you're in finance, accounting, then these actually, because of their high starting salaries, these are actually ranked very, very high on WSJ, but are ranked horribly when it comes to US News. It's not even ranked over there. And Forbes it's also not ranked because Forbes takes into account the alumni network, which WSJ doesn't, which is why it's important to understand what ranking you're looking at. So if you're looking purely on RI, I like using WSJ for that. then you are seeing Bentley University also up there in terms of financing and accounting majors. Harvey Mudd College, if you are a strong STEM student, then this is a university that you want to have there. By the way, I'm not talking about financial aid here. We'll get to that in a minute, but this is purely in terms of if you are a major, then these are sort of the top universities for a specific major that you may want to consider. Santa Clara University, this is a really interesting one. So this, again, not many may have heard of. Shanza keeps, I think, pitching this to a lot of students and parents and everything, and kids who are focused on STEM jobs. They have a really, because of their presence in Silicon Valley, they have a huge pipeline to the Googles, the Microsofts, and all of these startups. So the chances of you landing a very high tech salary job from Santa Clara University is really high. That's why it's in the top 20 at WSJ. But it's in 300, 400 type ranking in US News Global, right? Which is, sort of the gold standard ranking that everyone tends to look at. So these are sort of, 4 or 5 universities I wanted to mention that I thought may surprise people in terms of, universities that you may want to look at. Again, my alma mater is Penn. So, it's great for getting into Wall Street from Penn. They have strong recruiting pipelines as well. That's how I got into the workforce. But then, and I had never heard of Lehigh University. Lehigh University apparently also has a really strong Wall Street pipeline. So you don't have to just go to Penn, which is an Ivy League and has, those really attractive acceptance rates that Shanza walked you through. That's not your only gate to Wall Street in New York. That is the gate I took, but Lehigh University is sort of another option over here. That is 800th on the ranking, so well below Penn, but WSJ considers it top 30. So what we try to do at IONIB, I guess what sort of the messaging over here is that when kids come to us and the usual line is, my kid wants to go to Stanford or he wants to get into Princeton, Yale, what we try to do, an unpopular discussion that it ends up being, is that, well, there are all these other amazing universities that you should also look at. Have you heard of, NYU everyone's heard of, but have you heard of Emory University? Have you heard of Babson University, which I just spoke about? Have you heard of Villanova University, University of Florida? These are all really good universities when you are considering a business major, rather than just Penn, in which your chances are slim. So you want to have a really well-balanced college list that includes, yes, your reach schools, because acceptance rates, any school that has an acceptance rate in the single digits of 5%, 4%, which you saw all the top 20, have, it's going to be a reach. It's going to be a stretch whether you will actually be of those 3-5 students in Pakistan that are admitted. You need to balance it out with schools that are, safety schools, and there are target schools that have higher acceptance rate that may be a better fit for you based on your major in terms of considering. Similarly, for STEM, if I have a student who is, a STEM major, he's majoring in math, not only would I have Stanford, MIT there, that, given that his academic profile meets, the 1500 plus and the strong GPA and everything, but we would also be looking at Georgia Tech. You would also be looking at University of Michigan. We would also be looking at Harvey Mudd College. This doesn't mean that these universities are also, by the way, easy to get in, but the chances based on institutional priorities that Shans also spoke about, if you have enough of a balance in terms of the type of universities that you're applying for, and note that there are a lot more applications that go to the well-known and Ivy League universities, and applications are actually fewer that go to the lesser-known universities. So if you plan your list strategically enough based on your major, then we sort of build a list that may give you higher chances in terms of getting into university that gives you really good ROI and salary potential for your major. This is a hot topic, and I'm assuming there may be a lot of questions on this. We did already see a lot of questions over there as well. Sadly, I think similar to the acceptance rate, this is not a very pretty picture either, right? Let's talk about what the 4 categories financial assistance are. You have need blind aid, okay? Merit scholarships, these are not saying, oh, you got the 1,500, so you deserve $80,000 a year. This is not that sort of aid, right? This is aid that, okay, if you have the academic profile and you have made it to the 3-5 students that they want to admit, they're not going to take your financial situation consideration at all. Okay, so if you need like 100% aid, but you have the profile that you want to get admitted, they're not going to hold it against you. Although I think there's a caveat there as well, that within the common application, they do ask you if you are applying for aid. So there is some hint to admission officers. But generally, what need-blind universities do is that they're going to look at your profile separate to the financial aid that you need. So that's ideal. If you make it into the top 3-5 students for a T20, or you made it to that acceptance rate, then you have a high chance of getting aid at these schools. But these are only 8 universities: Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Bowdoin, MIT, Amherst, Brown recently, I think just this year they changed it, and Dartmouth. This may be the reason why we're seeing an increase in the acceptance rate for Brown as well, because they're not holding your financial aid against you. So these are the only universities that truly, if you make the cut, if you manage to slide into their single-digit acceptance rates and are ranked top nationally in Pakistan, you're in the top 50, that you will get that 100% full that you are looking for. But the gate is actually getting admitted, right? So that's the catch over there. You'll notice there are some schools over here that are not Ivy Leagues, like Bowdoin and Amherst. These are liberal arts schools. But they are also, don't let that fool you. Just because they're not Ivy League doesn't mean that they don't have very low acceptance rates. These are also extremely competitive to get into. Then the second sort of group of colleges are need aware, but generous privates. So now that I've talked about need blind, there's all of 8 schools that are not going to hold your financial aid against you. Everyone else is going to care whether you can pay for the university or not. So this is the sad truth, that another kid who may have a lesser SAT score than you, may have lesser GPA, but still is in the consideration pool. Obviously, he's met the mark, but has less of that fancy extracurricular spike and profile to you. But if he can pay for the university, they're gonna bump him up above you. Okay, so that's why it's very important to really understand that when you're applying to universities, how much can I truly afford to pay? If you can pay, right, you should not hold that back. Whatever you are able to pay, that should be an honest, admission on your CSS profile when you're filling out the financial aid. Because if you're going to, the more aid you ask for, the more it's going to hurt again. The more it's going to work against you in terms of your admission. So I actually had a student who got into Babson on the wait list, but they sent him a letter that if you are willing to reduce the aid that you want, we can reconsider your admission. So, they say it as well, black and white, right? So these are need-aware schools. So you've got schools like Duke, Rice, Northwestern, and elite, liberal art colleges that can give you 100% need met and can give you really, really high aid. But the catch is only if you are truly the best in the pool, right? So they're going to, if another one has a similar profile to you and is able to pay, they are going to accept them over you. So that's sort of that second group. Then you've got merit scholarships. Merit scholarships are not that common in the US. Usually it's a separate process. You have to apply for these merit scholarships. They will not meet your full demonstrated need. You're going to, have to sort of write separate essays for it. Vanderbilt scholarships are like extremely elite and competitive. I think it's like a top 1% that may, win some of those scholarships over there. New Jersey Institute of Technology also, they also have, separate forms that you need to fill out besides the ones that you fill on the Common App. Drexel, surprisingly, or not surprisingly, actually it's right next to Penn. We used to see a lot of huge South Asian community over there, a lot of Diwalis and Eid and concerts happening. And it shows, so there was, I think, upward of 20 students admitted in Pakistan at Drexel. And I think with an average merit scholarship of 40,000 USD. So Drexel seems to be doing really well just in terms of the endowments they're getting, or, someone's, really working hard in terms of the funding structure. But Drexel is a good university that if you can pay, 30 to 50,000 USD, because that's the total price tag for a lot of these universities, then, Drexel may give you that 40,000 merit scholarship if you are top of the pool. You do have some generous public universities, generous, a big caveat over there. This again does not mean that they'll cover your entire 80, 90, 100,000 fee bill, but they may give you some scholarships based off of your SATs and grades. So Alabama, for example, will give you automatic scholarship based off of, your GPA and your SAT if you have a certain threshold. If you met, if you've got a 1500 SAT and you've got a 3.8 GPA, the likelihood is just by applying, you'll get a scholarship over there at Alabama. This is similar, by the way, to a lot of universities in Asia, which, we'll speak about in our next webinar coming up, more on that. But a lot of those, a lot of outside the US, Hong Kong universities as well, give you that scholarship just purely based on your GPA and your aid. So the message over here is that unless you are truly elite and make it to these top 8, you have to consider paying from 30,000 to 50,000 USD for universities when you take in merit and scholarships into account. So if you get in the aid, the merit scholarships from, some of these universities like the Drexels and JIT, or some of, the public universities that you apply for, and a lot of these privates, if you are lucky, again, very competitive, you may get that 40 to 50,000 scholarship. That's the top of the line, but you will still need to pay 30 to 50 for your living expenses. So if you are asking the university to also pay for your living expenses, you are at a disadvantage. One small point I think that I didn't elaborate on, when we talk about full aid, right? So the need blind full aid met, that includes tuition and living expenses. But a lot of these, apart from these, need blind universities that I spoke about, all of the other universities are at the max going to meet your full tuition. And that also, competitively. If you are asking them to fund your living expenses as well, then obviously you are hurting your admission chances. So for the US, the reality check is you need 30 to 50 USD budget to get into a good university, realistically, taking into account scholarships. You've seen the numbers, what Shanta has walked you through. If you're looking for that full aid ride, you have to be really not just, the top 50, but you have to be a higher percentage of that, like top 1% probably in Pakistan, to get those full rides, because they will always prefer someone else with the same profile that can afford to pay. I hope I'm not repeating myself, but I feel like this needs, I need to say it in different ways. All right, so the takeaway, I think I'm in my time as well, 12 minutes left till and we want to take time for questions. So overall, what we are looking at, the takeaway from this is looking at, what goes behind the rankings, looking at, the new Ivies that I sort of walked you through, and the financial aid considerations. When we are building these college lists for students and the ever-changing landscape that we have in terms of, the AI chaos that we are facing with as well, and the uncertainty of careers, you need to look at your field strength, not overall rank, in building your university. So that will include some Ivy Leagues, but it will include a lot of other universities that you may not have heard of. You need to look at internship access. So if you are a tech person, Santa Clara University, universities that are located in the Silicon Valley can give you a lot of opportunities in terms of internships and jobs. You also need to look at what is the cost of this university versus what I'm going to get. So if you are going to major in history at Penn, it may take you many years to pay off the debt in terms of what you spent in that university versus the salary you're going to get. And obviously your ability to pay trumps everything. So if you need full aid, you just have a lot more competition, and it's not just going to be your profile that's going to make the cut. Okay, so that's sort of the end. We don't have an ending slide. I'm just going to leave it over here on this slide. But Shanza, I think we can do questions if there are any on the chat group. Otherwise, we had some questions come up during the session as well. Shanza, do you want to take a few questions from that list?
Sure. I've actually had questions coming in privately as well. I don't know if that's the case with you, Nazia, but I want to touch upon some of the questions that were sent to us in advance as well. And for the others, guys, please feel free to use the chat box to throw in your questions. If we don't get to it, you're more than welcome to, come in and see us. Our first consultation is free of cost. We'll happily answer any questions you have. One question is the Ivy League field the same? Does it work the same for graduate students? And the short answer is no. The answer, it's a much more promising, your chances are much more promising. We have a lot of students from Pakistan who go to graduate Ivy League universities. They are then looking at the framework shifts to what was your GPA at university, what extracurriculars did you do in your bachelor's program, what internships did you do in your bachelor's program, and so on. So for the undergraduates who've sat in very patiently through this presentation, the picture is a lot rosier. I would also like to pull a lot of what Nazia has said in terms of ROI and internship access, location, and industry, and say America is just a starting point. We at Ion Ivy would actually encourage you to take a global approach. This is the launch of our monthly series. Please stay tuned for when we talk about Europe, Asia. If you have financial constraints, where can you land those full scholarships? Nazia, I have a question in the chat box. Which specific extracurricular activities are most valued by Ivy League admissions committees, and how early should we realistically start building them? Do you want to take this one?
Yeah, I think this goes back actually to your session, right, on profile building, which extracurricular. So it really depends on the major. So more and more, I think it's in terms of, what major you are applying for. So if you are doing medicine, if you're on a pre-med track, then, you need to, and you're applying as a biology major, then you need to have shown some interest over there. So it really, in terms of research, so it really depends on, I guess, what type of extracurriculars depends on what it is that you are interested in, because for internationals, it's very important. You can be undecided. That is the case in US universities, but you still have to apply for a major. In order to put you, at the top versus other students, you have to show your unique interest in that major. How have you supported it, whether it's through research that you've done, internships that you've done, or competitions that you've taken part in. If you are, more of a STEM student, then you're talking more Olympiads, more research. If you're a more business student, we're talking about more internships, more jobs. So that is really the situation there, and that's something that is very unique to you. And we sit down with students to sort of lay that out. How early? I would say ninth grade, or maybe the summer before ninth grade. Because it's really about, ninth grade is like exploratory. This can't be made up. Your unique interest and strength can't be developed in 11th grade, the summer before you're applying, right? This is something, and admission officers pick up on that as well. It needs to be an authentic, progression that, you started off at, a club as a member, then, you took part in, key initiatives in 10th grade. Then, by the time you're in 11th grade, you were like leading the team into winning, several international competitions. So it's really about starting early enough so that you're able to explore 2 or 3 areas of interest. And then you're able to build on that, through 10th and 11th grade to show, your academic rigor in that field, or to show your leadership in that field. Because universities are looking at you holistically. They want to see not just your academic rigor, but they want to see, your actual interest in that field, and how you were able to, hone your leadership potential over there as well, and what sort of impact did you have in the community around you. And that doesn't happen in one grade. It's truly works magic when you start, from ninth grade.
I have a very interesting question that I do want to take a minute to take, Nazia. Can you please share why the 2 students were sent back last year, just so we know the do and don'ts when applying? So I feel very strongly about this particular case, the 2 students who were, after being accepted to Harvard from Pakistan last year, who were then not allowed to continue. You will, as I mentioned, there is not a lot of competition in this space in Pakistan. And in order to differentiate, in order to get to the top, many students are willing to take risks. they are willing to put in activities in their profile that they actually have not done. Schools inflate grades, and certifications are made up and so on. Here at Ion Ivy, we simply do not do that because we don't want to risk playing with your child's future. There was another case at Yale last year where an Indian female student, the semester freshman had just started, she was escorted off the campus um, by the campus police. And the reason was she was boasting to her roommate about how she had made some stuff up in her application. The roommate went, told the registration office, who looked into the case, pursued it further, found out it to be true, and escorted the child was sent back to India. Now, this is not a case of India. This is not a case of Pakistan. You guys, I'm sure, are very well aware about unethical practices that go on over here. It seems to be the easy route to take, but we at INIV firmly believe in actually giving your child the experiences, the tools, building their capabilities so that they can actually survive college and university as well, which is even more competitive. um, we really encourage you to take the long-term view. So thank you very much for that question. Um, Nazia, I had one which I think you can do a bit of justice on. We just have a few minutes. I
Yeah.
would request for those of you that we're not able to get questions to, please feel free to shoot an email to us, and we'll have a free consultation with you to make sure all your questions are asked. Nazia, the question is that my extracurricular profile is weak and I want to apply to a good university and currently have a low chance of success there. How much harm would a gap year do to me to focus on profile building? And as a Pakistani, we almost always want full aid. Does applying to public universities hurt our chances for aid? Can you speak to a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I actually had a student who wanted to take a gap year last year. He felt that he hadn't taken enough of the math courses that would signal his strength to applying to top engineering and math colleges. And he was like, I'm going to take a gap year. At that time, he was, in 11th grade. And I was like, well, what are you going to do in that gap year? Right? Because what you do in that gap year has to be really phenomenal in order to, be able to tell the universities that, what was the reason for taking the gap year, and what it is that you did in that gap year that, helped you pursue this interest in a really meaningful way. And a year is not that long as well, so you have to really plan it really well. And sort of after that analysis with the student, we actually realized that he was better off not wasting the year, but applying to, because his grades were still good. And he took a global approach and got into Bocconi in Italy, which is a great university for math and STEM majors. So it really depends on, again, what your major is, what your current profile looks like, and what your story is in terms of why you weren't able to build a profile before and what you hope to achieve in your gap year, versus also looking at other universities for which your profile may still be really, really strong and you can still go ahead and apply. It could be a hybrid approach where you still apply to a few universities, and see what you get. And, if you don't get anything, then you take that gap year. So it's not all or nothing. You can, take that balanced approach as well. Public universities don't meet your 100% need, as I talked about earlier as well. So you have to be, at best case scenario, you have to be looking at, still being able to pay 30 to 50,000 when you apply to public universities. It won't hurt your chances at other universities. I mean, that's irrelevant. They don't look at what other universities you applied at. But realistically, public universities may be easier to get in, but not really for internationals because they prefer in-state residents a lot. So acceptance rate is still very competitive. And also their endowments and financial aid are geared towards their residents more than internationals. Yeah. I actually wanted to take a question here before we, because I thought this was really interesting. Sorry, Shanza.
No, go ahead.
Unless yours is more interesting than mine after I read mine, then you can take that one. But this is after US education as an international student, how can you get internships or even get employed after investing so much? What is the return if it will be covered? Being admitted is just one step. Yes, it truly is just the first step. And that's why, it's important to look at the rankings in terms of what are the chances of you getting placed in a job market. I think for Pakistanis, prestige should not be up there. ROI needs to be up there in terms of, your ability to land a job with, a good salary. However, it was much easier in my time. Once you graduated, you had a year to, look for a job. And, on that visa, once you got hired, they gave you an H1. But, we've seen all the news that's happening as well. Visas are more difficult to get because the companies have to sponsor for you. So if there is a US profile who has a similar, university sort of profile as you and doesn't need that on sponsorship for an H1 visa, they are going to prefer that student. So, we don't like to mince words. We're often told, I think Shanza and myself, that we need to give better, rosier pictures to students. But, this is the reality. So you have to put up with a tough job market in the US. Already AI is disrupting it quite a bit. I think this is the unemployment rate has actually increased much more for college graduates versus other folks in the US. So coupled with the AI uncertainty as well as the visa difficulty, it is difficult to get jobs after your US, which is why you have to really do your research in terms of how strong the recruiting pipelines are for these universities. And, those companies that are recruiting from those universities, how friendly are they in terms of sponsoring visas. And this is a good segue into why then you should consider global universities, because Italy, Bocconi University has a really strong, internship opportunities and work culture. HKU can get you into the same Goldman Sachs, Wall Street type companies over there in Hong Kong with, lesser barriers in terms of visas. So I hope that answered that to some extent. I think we're 3 minutes over though, but Shanza, over to you if you wanted to wrap it up with anything else.
I mean, guys, we have still questions coming in privately as well, and this could go on. The good news is we are going to do this on a monthly basis where we will be inviting industry practitioners as well as experts from around the world in different fields, whether it is IT, whether it is medicine, whether it is finance, who will be talking about what are the kind of university graduates that they are hiring. So you're not just looking at it from a counseling perspective, and we are going to make this live. So you can ask them questions directly and hear it from them. I will acknowledge, as Nazia said, that the picture for Ivy League universities, it's kind of like a doom and gloom scenario. It doesn't mean that you don't apply. You absolutely should give it a shot. But number one, make a balanced list for the United States. And number two, if you have serious financial issues, which most Pakistani families have financial challenges of paying 100K, which is what a private university is going to cost in the United States. Please keep a global approach in mind. There are now countries where you can land either full merit scholarships or get, a really subsidized education for a highly ranked universities with good immigration prospects. And so on. So we at Ion Ivy like for students to open up their options rather than just keeping a tunnel view. With that, thank you so much for taking out the time on a Sunday morning. If you have any ideas for what you would like to hear in the future. Please do feel free to shoot us an email. We will be sharing a calendar with everyone on the webinars we would be hosting down the year. And a happy Mother's Day to all the moms there, including you, Nazia.
Thank you, and to everyone in the group as well. Whoever's a mother here. No one should be a mother here. Actually, no, we do have some parents there, so there should be some.
Yes, I see parents in the group, Nazia.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Have a great Sunday, everyone. Thank you. Bye-bye.